It's strange how the most important moments of our lives rarely arrive with warning signs. My name is Claire, I'm 29 years old, and today I want to let you into a chapter of my life that I never thought I'd share publicly. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been treated as though your voice didn't matter, then maybe what I went through will resonate with you in ways I can't even imagine. The day of my grandmother's funeral was heavy with grief, but beneath the sorrow, there was another tension simmering, one that had nothing to do with death and everything to do with power. My father, a billionaire who commands attention wherever he goes, stood tall and untouchable even in that moment of mourning. He's the kind of man who believes money is the only language worth speaking. And I was just his daughter, the quiet shadow he often forgot existed. When he looked at me that day, in front of everyone gathered to honor my grandmother's life, he didn't just dismiss me. He cut through me with words so sharp I still feel them echoing. "You are nothing." He said it with finality, like he was stamping my identity into the ground before anyone could challenge it. And everyone heard. Some gasped, some lowered their heads, but no one spoke up. Yet life has a strange way of turning humiliation into revelation. Because only minutes later, as the lawyer unfolded the will my grandmother had carefully prepared, every single thing I thought I knew about my family, about myself, and about the power my father held over me, shattered. Before I take you deeper into what happened next, I need you to understand the complicated web that existed in my family long before that funeral. My father was never just dad. He was the untouchable mogul, the man whose presence filled every room, who expected obedience and feared nothing, not even the destruction of his own daughter's spirit. To him, love was a weakness, and vulnerability was something to be crushed. My grandmother, on the other hand, was the quiet anchor of my world. She saw me when no one else did. When my father belittled me, she'd squeeze my hand and whisper that my worth wasn't defined by his arrogance. Losing her meant losing my only real ally in that house of cold wealth and hollow grandeur. That's why the funeral wasn't just a farewell. It was a stage for old wounds to bleed in public. So when my father stood up and declared that I was nothing, I felt stripped bare. But what neither of us knew was that my grandmother, even in her absence, had one final gift for me. She left behind words not spoken, but written in the legal ink of her will, a document that would flip the balance of power in a way no one saw coming. And that's where I need you with me. Because the twists that followed aren't just about inheritance or money. They're about identity, legacy, and the quiet strength it takes to stand against someone who has always tried to erase you. Stay with me through this story, because I promise, every chapter unravels a piece of the truth that left even me speechless. And before we go further, take a moment to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any of the stories where I lay bare the moments that changed everything. The funeral home smelled faintly of lilies, that sweet, almost suffocating fragrance that clung to every corner. I remember looking around at the sea of black coats and solemn faces, all of them blurring together like shadows in my peripheral vision. Everyone had come to pay respects to my grandmother, a woman who, in her quiet way, had touched more lives than most people realized. But even in that sacred atmosphere of remembrance, my father managed to shift the focus toward himself. He walked in late, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor, his presence like a cold gust that silenced whispers. People straightened in their seats as though royalty had arrived, though we all knew he cared more about appearances than about the woman we were burying. I sat near the front, clutching a handkerchief so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My heart wasn't just grieving, it was bracing, because with my father, every gathering carried the risk of humiliation. He thrived on it, especially when I was the target. I could feel his eyes on me even before he opened his mouth, like a predator circling prey. When our gazes finally met, his were filled with the same disdain I had known my whole life. And then, in front of the priest, the lawyer, and the countless relatives who had once cooed at me as a child, he said it. Those 3 words, sharp and final. You are nothing. The silence that followed was almost louder than the insult itself. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I wanted to disappear into the floor. Some cousins exchanged awkward glances. A distant aunt raised her eyebrows, but no one dared to confront him. He was the billionaire patriarch after all, the man who had bankrolled half of their lives. Speaking against him would be social suicide. I felt exposed, like a glass shattered in the middle of the room, and yet I forced myself not to cry. If I cried, he'd win again. As I stared at the polished wooden coffin holding the woman who had loved me more than anyone, my father's words rang in my head, each repetition heavier than the last. "You are nothing." Was I really? Part of me wanted to scream, to remind him of every childhood moment where I desperately tried to earn his affection. The drawings I once taped to his office door, the trophies from school he never noticed, the birthdays he missed because business deals mattered more. Each memory stung, proof that I had been invisible to him long before this funeral. But my grandmother had always been the antidote to that pain. When I was little, she would sneak me cookies in the kitchen while telling me, "Claire, don't let his words take root in your heart. He only knows how to measure worth in dollars." She taught me that kindness was a different kind of wealth, one my father could never understand. Losing her meant losing that shield. And now, without her, I felt like a soldier stripped of armor in a battlefield I couldn't escape. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly aware of the tension that had thickened the air. He carried a leather briefcase that seemed heavier than it should, and I caught him glancing at me, almost apologetically, as though he knew what was about to unfold. My father, meanwhile, leaned back with the arrogance of a man who thought he had already won. His insult wasn't just about belittling me, it was his way of reminding everyone that the legacy belonged to him, that I was merely an afterthought in a dynasty he controlled. Still, there was something in the way the lawyer adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat that told me my father's certainty might be misplaced. The murmurs in the crowd quieted as the lawyer began to open the briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents sealed with the unmistakable weight of finality. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just about money. It was about the truth my grandmother had left behind, the truth she hadn't trusted to be spoken aloud while alive. As the papers touched the table, my mind raced with questions. Did she leave everything to him, as he no doubt expected? Did she leave something to charity, as she often spoke about in her softer moments? Or was there a chance she had left something for me? The thought seemed almost impossible, given how thoroughly my father had worked to erase me from every conversation about legacy. And yet, hope flickered like a stubborn candle in the wind. My father crossed his arms, his smirk widening as if he could already taste the victory. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. His confidence was chilling, the kind of certainty that came from decades of winning battles no one dared to fight against him. I clenched my fists beneath the table, trying to ground myself. If I had learned anything from my grandmother, it was that storms sometimes clear the air instead of destroying it. Maybe, just maybe, this storm would prove to be one of those. The lawyer finally began to read, his voice steady, yet laced with the weight of anticipation. The first few lines were formalities, acknowledging her passing, her wishes, the standard legal language that seemed too cold for someone so warm. But then, the tone shifted. "To my beloved granddaughter Claire," he read aloud. And for the first time that day, every pair of eyes turned to me. My breath caught, not from fear this time, but from something far more powerful. My father's smirk faltered, his jaw tightening. In that moment, I knew the funeral wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of something neither of us had seen coming. The words, "To my beloved granddaughter Claire," hung in the air like a spark waiting to ignite a fire. I felt my heartbeat in my throat as the lawyer adjusted his glasses and continued. "You have been the light in my life when shadows seemed overwhelming. Though others may have overlooked you, I never did. And because of that, I leave you something that I hope will remind you of your worth." The room stirred with whispers, a wave of disbelief rippling through the mourners. My father sat up straighter, his smug expression replaced by a tightening jawline, his composure cracking in real time. The lawyer cleared his throat and unfolded the next page, his tone steady. "I leave to Claire not only the family lake house, where she and I spent countless summers together, but also the controlling shares in Marlowe Industries, the company I built with my late husband." My breath caught. Marlowe Industries wasn't just a company. It was the cornerstone of my family's wealth, the very empire my father had used to elevate himself into the billionaire's world he so proudly flaunted. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's fingers drummed against his knee, a small tell that betrayed his rising fury. Gasps spread through the room as the weight of those words settled in. A cousin leaned forward, whispering to another, "She gave it to Claire?" while an uncle adjusted his tie nervously. I wanted to sink into the floor, to hide from the attention suddenly pressed upon me. And yet, beneath the shock, something unexpected began to rise inside me. A flicker of vindication, the quiet roar of a truth I had always known but never been allowed to believe. My grandmother had seen me. She had trusted me. She had chosen me. As I listened, memories from childhood flooded back, weaving themselves into this moment. I saw us painting together on the porch of the lake house, her telling me stories about perseverance, about never letting arrogance define worth. "The world will try to make you small, Claire," she had once said, brushing a stray hair from my face. "But remember, what matters is not the noise of others, but the strength you carry inside." Those words echoed now, louder than my father's cruel declaration at the funeral. She had prepared me for this moment without ever saying it aloud. My father finally broke the silence, his voice sharp and cutting. "This is absurd. She was old, not in her right mind. Everyone knows I am the rightful heir." His words sliced through the air, but there was a tremor beneath them, a tremor only I caught. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in him. Not the kind of fear that came from losing money. He had more than enough. This was different. This was the fear of losing control, of watching the world realize that he wasn't untouchable. The lawyer remained composed, his professionalism like a shield against my father's rage. "The will has been verified and notarized multiple times." Mrs. Marlowe was very clear in her intentions. His voice carried authority, a reminder that even my father's wealth couldn't bend every system. The murmurs grew louder now, guests daring to look at me differently. Not as the overlooked daughter, but as someone suddenly central to the legacy. My cheeks burned with the intensity of their stares, but I forced myself to hold my chin high. Inside, however, the storm was real. A war raged between disbelief and pride, between the weight of expectation and the fragile hope that I might actually be capable of carrying this mantle. My father's glare bore into me, a silent promise that he would not let this stand. But even as his fury grew, I could feel the subtle shift in the room. People no longer looking only at him, but at me. The balance of power was tilting, slowly but undeniably. I remembered once hiding under the staircase during one of my father's grand parties, listening to him brag about deals and dominance, watching how people clung to him like moths to a flame. Back then, I had believed I could never be part of that world, that my place was always in the shadows. But now, with my grandmother's voice carried through the lawyer's steady words, the shadows seemed to thin. For the first time, I wondered if maybe I wasn't meant to be invisible at all. The lawyer continued reading, outlining specific assets, investments, properties, and trusts, many of which were tied to my grandmother's vision for the company's future. The more he read, the clearer it became that she hadn't acted on a whim. This wasn't the decision of a confused old woman. It was the deliberate choice of someone who had thought about the future long and hard, who had known that my father's arrogance would only erode what she had built. She had chosen me not out of sentiment alone, but out of strategy. My father's breathing grew heavier, each exhale sharper than the last. His composure was unraveling, thread by thread, in front of the very people who had always revered him. And as I sat there, my grandmother's words echoing in the room, I realized that the will wasn't just about inheritance, it was about shifting the story. My father's declaration that I was nothing had barely left his lips when the truth rose to contradict him, louder and stronger than I ever could have imagined. And though the night was far from over, one thing was already clear. His grip on the family's future had just begun to slip. My father shot up from his chair so abruptly that the wooden legs screeched against the polished floor. His face, usually a mask of calm authority, was now twisted with barely contained rage. "This is manipulation," he barked, his voice echoing across the room. She was old, fragile, and Claire, he spat my name as though it were poison, clearly took advantage of her in her final years. Gasps rippled again, not just at his accusation, but at the sheer audacity of trying to paint me as the villain in the middle of a funeral. I felt heat rise in my chest, but before I could speak, the lawyer raised a hand, his expression firm. "Mr. Marlowe," the lawyer said, voice steady like stone against the storm. "Your mother signed this will under the supervision of multiple witnesses, including myself. She was clear, coherent, and deliberate. There is no legal basis to question her state of mind." The calmness of his words was a blade sharper than anger. It cut through my father's tantrum with precision. Still, I could see the fury in his clenched fists, the way his nostrils flared as he struggled to maintain dominance. For a man who thrived on control, this unraveling was unbearable. My cousins and uncles exchanged uneasy glances. I could almost hear the calculations in their minds. Was it safer to remain loyal to the billionaire patriarch, or would aligning with me, the newly empowered granddaughter, offer more security in the long run? Their silence was heavy, but their shifting body language spoke volumes. One cousin even dared to nod at me, a small gesture of recognition that almost brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I had been invisible to them, and now, with my grandmother's voice speaking through the will, they were finally forced to see me. The lawyer continued, unfazed by the chaos. In addition to the lake house and controlling shares, Mrs. Marlowe has left Claire personal letters to be delivered privately, along with her journals spanning decades. My breath caught again. Letters? Journals? My grandmother had always been a woman of secrets, gentle, yes, but layered, like a novel with hidden chapters. The thought that she had left me her most intimate words made my chest tighten. She hadn't just trusted me with her wealth, she had trusted me with her truth. My father laughed bitterly, a hollow sound that failed to mask his desperation. Letters? Journals? This is sentimental nonsense. None of it means anything in the real world. But even as he spoke, I saw the cracks in his facade widening. His power had always rested on perception, on being the man everyone else feared and admired. Yet here, at his own mother's funeral, he was being reduced to a man grasping at straws, his authority slipping like sand through his fingers. Memories surged within me, sharper now, almost as if my grandmother's spirit was guiding me through them. I remembered her sitting with me under the stars at the lake house, telling me about the early days of the company, how she and my grandfather had risked everything, not just for money, but for the vision of creating something that would last. "This family," she had whispered one summer night, "is more than wealth. It is legacy, and legacy must be carried by those who understand its weight, not just its shine." At the time, I had thought it was just a bedtime story. Now, I understood it was a prophecy. I wanted to speak, to stand up for myself, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I let the silence stretch, the weight of the lawyer's words filling the room. It was strange. Sometimes silence spoke louder than rage. My father was shouting, thrashing against the inevitable, but I could feel the shift in the audience. They were no longer entirely his. For the first time, some were listening to the possibility of me. That realization was both terrifying and empowering. The lawyer, turning another page, read the next clause, and the air seemed to crackle with electricity. "To my son, Richard Marlowe," he said, his eyes flicking briefly toward my father, "I leave a stipend that reflects my gratitude for his role in expanding the company. However, he shall not hold controlling power over its future direction. That responsibility I entrust entirely to Claire." The room erupted, not just gasps this time, but murmurs that bordered on chaos. My father's face drained of color, the mighty billionaire suddenly looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He slammed his fist against the table, rattling the documents. "She's destroying everything I built," he shouted. But I knew, and perhaps deep down he did too, that it wasn't his empire. It had always been hers. The lawyer's voice rose above the noise. Mrs. Marlowe was very clear. She believed Claire had the values and vision to guide this family and its business into the future. These were her words, not mine. And in that moment, I realized the will wasn't just a transfer of assets. It was a declaration, a rebellion against the arrogance that had suffocated us for years. My grandmother's love had spoken louder than my father's cruelty, but as I looked at his shaking hands and furious eyes, I knew this was not the end of the battle. It was only the beginning, and the war for legacy was about to ignite in ways none of us were prepared for. The room buzzed with uneasy energy, a chorus of whispers filling the silence left after the last clause was read. My father remained standing, towering over the lawyer with the fury of a man betrayed. "She was manipulated," he shouted, his voice trembling with indignation. "Claire is not capable of running anything, let alone the company my father and I built." His words echoed, but they no longer landed with the certainty they once carried. Some guests nodded, clinging to his authority, but others stared at him with doubt, the cracks in his power now visible to all. I stayed seated, my hands clasped tightly on my lap, reminding myself of my grandmother's advice. Silence can be stronger than noise, but inside my mind was racing. Capable? I had doubted myself for years because of him. He had planted seeds of inadequacy so deep that I believed them. Yet here I was, entrusted with everything he thought I could never handle. The contradiction was dizzying, but also liberating. It was as if my grandmother's faith had reached across death to steady me when I needed it most. My cousin Sarah broke the silence first, her voice trembling. Maybe Mrs. Marlowe saw something in Claire that we didn't. She spent more time with her than with any of us. The murmurs grew louder, some in agreement, others in protest. My father glared at her with such intensity that she immediately lowered her gaze, but the damage was done. Someone had voiced support for me, and that single spark threatened to spread. The lawyer, remaining calm, reminded everyone, "This is not a debate. These are Mrs. Marlowe's final wishes, legally binding and thoroughly documented. Your opinions do not alter their validity." He spoke with a firmness that silenced even my father momentarily, though the rage in his eyes only deepened. I wondered if he saw in me not just a daughter, but an enemy, a rival who had taken something he believed was rightfully his. As I looked at him, another memory of my grandmother surfaced. I was 15, hiding in the lake house after another one of his tirades. She found me curled on the porch steps, tears staining my cheeks. Sitting beside me, she said softly, "Claire, your father's empire is built on fear, but fear is a fragile foundation. One day, it will crumble. When it does, you'll see that kindness and vision endure far longer than intimidation." At the time, I thought she was just comforting me. Now I realized she had been preparing me for this exact moment. My father tried again, this time appealing to the crowd. "She doesn't know business, she doesn't know power. She's naive, weak, emotional." His voice thundered, but his words no longer seemed absolute. The lawyer didn't flinch, and some relatives exchanged skeptical looks. Weak, he called me. Yet I was the one still sitting calmly while he raged like a storm. The irony was not lost on me. Another uncle, Edward, cleared his throat. "Richard, with all due respect, if this was your mother's wish, perhaps we should accept it. She was never reckless." The statement was tentative, almost apologetic, but it marked another crack in my father's support. He turned on Edward instantly, his voice dripping with venom. "So you side with her? With this betrayal?" The word betrayal stung, though I knew it wasn't me who had betrayed anyone. My grandmother had made her choice freely. His anger wasn't about betrayal. It was about loss of control. The atmosphere grew heavier, almost suffocating. I felt every eye in the room on me, weighing me, questioning me, wondering whether I could truly carry the mantle handed to me. My palms were slick with sweat, but I refused to wipe them. I wanted to appear steady, even if inside I was trembling. My grandmother had believed in me. That had to be enough, even if no one else did. The lawyer, sensing the rising chaos, tapped the documents with deliberate calm. "We have not yet finished," he said, his voice slicing through the noise. "There remains one final clause of the will that must be read." The murmurs hushed instantly, anticipation hanging thick in the air. My father froze, his rage momentarily eclipsed by curiosity and fear. What else had my grandmother hidden within her final words? I straightened in my seat, my breath shallow. I thought I had already heard the most shocking parts, but the lawyer's tone suggested otherwise. Whatever was coming next would not only seal my grandmother's intentions, but might also change everything I thought I knew about my family. The room held its breath as the lawyer turned the last page of the will. His eyes scanned the words with care before he began to read, his voice slower, deliberate, as though he understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. "And finally," he said, "to ensure that my wishes are respected and my legacy preserved, I must reveal one truth that has long remained unspoken." The crowd leaned forward, curiosity sharp in the air. My father's face hardened, his fists tightening at his sides. The lawyer continued, "Richard Marlowe, though my son, has long prioritized power over family, profit over integrity. Therefore, to protect what I have built, I declare that any attempt by him to contest this shall result in his complete disinheritance." The gasps were louder than before, the murmurs rising into a swell of disbelief. My father staggered back, his face pale. It wasn't just that he had lost control. He had been explicitly written out, his threats neutralized before they could even begin. My grandmother had seen his next move long before he made it. He slammed his hand against the back of a chair, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "This is outrageous," he roared, veins rising on his forehead. "She's trying to strip me of what's rightfully mine. And all of you are just going to sit here and watch her destroy everything?" His desperation spilled into every word. But for the first time, I noticed fewer people lowering their heads in submission. Instead, they looked at him with unease, as though realizing they were witnessing not strength, but collapse. The lawyer raised his voice slightly, overriding the chaos. "Mrs. Marlowe's wishes are final. She left no room for interpretation. Her trust in Claire is absolute, and her distrust in Richard equally clear." The words cut deep, but they weren't mine. They were hers. A strange mix of grief and pride swelled inside me. My grandmother had fought for me even after her death. I wasn't standing alone. My father turned toward me then, his eyes blazing with fury. "You think this changes who you are?" he spat. "You're still weak. You'll ruin everything she built. And when you fail, they'll all see that I was right." His words stung, but they no longer pierced the way they once did. For years, I had let his voice define me. Now, I realized, his voice was just noise, loud, cruel, but hollow. Something inside me shifted. I stood, my knees trembling, but my voice steadier than I expected. "You said I was nothing," I began, my voice carrying across the room. Every eye turned toward me, the air electric. "But she believed I was something. She believed I was enough. And for the first time, I believe her more than I believe you." My hands shook as I spoke, but I didn't stop. "You can rage, you can insult me, but the truth is here, written in her own words. You can't erase me anymore." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with unspoken emotions. Some relatives nodded subtly, others avoided my gaze, but the tide was turning. My father opened his mouth as if to retaliate, but no words came. His power, so absolute for so long, had finally met a force he couldn't bully into submission. The truth left by a mother who knew him better than anyone. I felt tears pressing against my eyes, not from weakness, but from release. My grandmother had carried this weight for years, preparing for the day when I would have to face him without her by my side. And in her final act, she had given me the strength I never thought I possessed. Her voice lived on in me, guiding me, steadying me. The lawyer closed the folder, his role complete. "This concludes the reading of the will," he announced. But for me, it was not an ending. It was the beginning of something entirely new. I stood taller, my father shrinking in the background of the story he had always tried to control. For the first time, the room did not revolve around him. It revolved around me. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one thing was undeniable. My grandmother's final words had shattered his empire of intimidation and given me the chance to rebuild on a foundation stronger than fear. As I looked at the guests dispersing, whispers trailing behind them, I felt both the weight of responsibility and the lightness of freedom. My father's shadow would not vanish overnight, but his grip on my identity had been broken. I was no longer nothing. I was Claire Marlowe, heir not only to a company, but to a legacy of resilience. And though the battle with him was far from over, I knew I would never face it the same way again. When I walked out of that funeral home, the world felt different. The sky was the same pale gray of mourning, the air still heavy with loss. But inside me something fundamental had shifted. For so long, I carried the belief that I was invisible, a shadow trailing behind a man whose voice silenced mine. Yet, in that single afternoon, with my grandmother's final words echoing through the lawyer's voice, I realized I had never been invisible to her, and that was enough to make me visible to myself. I won't pretend it was easy. Standing against my father wasn't some triumphant victory where the crowd erupted in applause and my pain instantly vanished. No, it was raw, messy, terrifying. I felt like my knees could buckle at any second. But the truth is, sometimes courage doesn't feel like courage in the moment. It feels like survival. And in that moment, I survived him. For the first time, I didn't let his definition of me become my reality. As I reflect on everything, I think about the legacy my grandmother left behind. It wasn't just a company or a house by the lake. It was a lesson that love can outlast cruelty, that quiet strength can overpower arrogance, and that even the smallest, most overlooked voice can carry the weight of truth when spoken at the right time. That's what she gave me, and that's what I want to carry forward. Maybe you've felt like me before, like someone's words diminished you, like you weren't enough. If so, I need you to hear me. You are not defined by those who fail to see your worth. You are not measured by the standards of someone who cannot love without conditions. Your value doesn't vanish because someone powerful tells you that you are nothing. I know how those words can echo, how they can bruise, but I also know they don't have the final say. My grandmother's will wasn't just about assets, it was about rewriting the story of my life. And now, I have the chance to do something she always encouraged me to do. Share my truth so others can find their own strength. That's why I'm here, telling you this story today. Not because it's easy to relive, but because I believe stories like these can help us all feel a little less alone in the battles we face. So, if my story resonated with you, if you felt even for a moment that spark of recognition, that reminder that you too have the power to stand against those who try to erase you, I want you to stay with me. This channel is where I'll keep sharing the moments that shaped me, the struggles and the victories, the times I almost broke, and the lessons that brought me back together again. Please take a second right now to subscribe. It may seem like a small gesture, but it means the world to me. Every subscriber is not just a number. It's a voice, a connection, a reminder that we are building something together out of honesty and courage. Click that button and join me, so we can keep turning pain into strength and silence into stories worth hearing. And as I close this chapter, I want you to remember one last thing. Sometimes the people who try hardest to convince you that you're nothing do so because they're afraid of the power you haven't yet discovered in yourself. Don't let them silence it. Let it grow. Let it shine. Because you are more than enough, and no one, not even the loudest voice, can take that truth away.